And so it really comes down to that. That's the principle of masculinity. My wife says it best. She says, after you have a kid is when you figure out who you marry. It's hard.
How do I get a wife? I'm a 22-year-old man, doesn't have a wife. How do I? So why do you think that is? Why are young people becoming more attracted to the Catholic faith now?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons, but I think that the main reason is that our society has surfeited young men with pleasure and convenience. They've just been stuffed to the brim with as much dopamine as they can handle, in a certain sense. And they've realized that it does not satisfy. It does not satisfy. You could have everything this world has to offer, and you will still be longing for something, for someone. And so I think that's what our culture has come to, is it's coming to a head. It's coming to a head, and you definitively nowadays have to decide, will you be with Christ and with the gospel or not? The middle ground is excluded. It's not there anymore. We're coming to a time where you have to stake your claim with either Christ or with the world. And there's no more good men anymore. There's no more good men. Either men are going to be excellent or they're going to be cowards, and they're not going to live up to their call and their vocation. And I think that's what we're seeing. I think, praise be to God, but we're seeing a tremendous revival in the church. And I think that the success of my YouTube channel, it's all God's grace, first of all, but the success of my YouTube channel is a testimony to that. There are young men out there, thousands of them, who are starving for the truths of the faith. They're starving for theology, for purpose in life, for something worth dying for. And they're finding it in the Catholic Church in droves. I have so many friends who are converts, thanks be to God. And in the comments of my videos, I hear all kinds of people saying, I'm converting, or I've recently converted and this video is very helpful, thank you, right? So we're seeing that, and we're seeing it in massive numbers. And I really just think it's a testimony to the Holy Spirit moving and people just realizing that you're not made for this world. We are more wealthy than any of our ancestors. Just the average American has more conveniences than any of their ancestors, even if their ancestors were kings. Nobody 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, had one of these things where you could have anything you wanted within 15 minutes. It's absurd. And so men are just starving for purpose. That's what it is. They're starving for purpose, and they find it in the faith of the fathers.
Yeah, and so I have a really difficult question for you. How old are you?
Is that a difficult question? Hopefully I can do the math and it's not astronomically high, but I'm 28.
So 28 and I'm 22. And yeah, your videos really do speak to just the younger generation, us in our 20s. And just generally, like a lot of the younger generations below 50, that's what we can call the younger generations, they're leaving the church. And so why do you think that Catholicism went from something, say, in the 50s where everyone was going to Mass, at least on Sundays, to now where like the below 50 generation isn't present at church at all, at Mass at all?
Well, I think that I call them dinosaur churches. So basically churches where the median age is 50 or above, kind of like what you're talking about. But I don't go to one of those. The parish that I go to, the median age is probably 29, maybe 30, maybe early 30s. The church that I go to has cry rooms that are stuffed to the brim. It's kind of, it's a good problem to have, but it's kind of annoying having 2 kids and having to sit in a cry room with 50 other screaming kids and their parents, right? So it's a good problem to have, but the faith that is resonating mostly with young men is the traditional faith. And I personally attend a Latin Mass, and I know a lot of young men really enjoy the rigor and the discipline that they find in the Latin Mass, and that's personally where I go, and it's an incredibly youthful parish. But there are many Novus Ordo parishes that have good and reverent liturgies, and young people are just drawn to that. They are drawn to that because church, for people my age growing up, usually meant you would go into a building that was poorly decorated, and you would hear somebody play the guitar and sing kind of hokey worship songs, and then you would go up for communion, and your grandmother or your aunt or your, sister or whatever would be distributing communion, and then you go back to your pew, and then the priest would make a joke and then give you the final blessing, and then you'd leave, right? Like, I think that's a common experience. That's kind of what I grew up going to. That's the kind of liturgy I grew up going to. And there's well-intentioned people. I'm not throwing stones at anybody, but that's what it was. And if you're a young man and you're told that this is the most important thing on the planet, and then you see a 73-year-old woman distributing communion, and you see your teenage classmate distributing communion, you're like, really? That's the thing? That's the thing, right? And so I think that a lot of young people are swinging the pendulum in the other way, where a lot of us grew up with liturgies that were just unfortunately irresponsible. They were unfortunately just irreverent. And so the pendulum is swinging the other way, and that's why massive amounts of young people, especially young men, I think, are attending more traditional liturgies, especially the Latin Mass, because there the way that the Latin Mass is prayed matches what the church teaches about the Eucharist. It's obvious. It's so blatantly obvious that whatever's happening on the altar is substantially different than what happens everywhere else every other day of the week. And that's just unfortunately not what people like me experienced growing up. And so we gravitate towards the Latin Mass. So yeah, you say that there are many young men who aren't going to Mass. Sure, that's probably true. But there are so many young men who are. And I know, because I go to a Mass where every Sunday after Mass there are 30, 50, 60, I don't know, there's a ton of people my age and younger who I could speak with at any point.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were talking about just the females getting involved in the church, and I've noticed that. I've actually heard people say, like, well, we don't want a priest to show up to our event. We lay people can do it ourselves. And so you just kind of see, like, just this bias in some of the modern church people that say, well, we don't want anything masculine, or in society in general, we don't want anything of the patriarchy. And so what, on the reverse, on the bright side, how can we start to make the church more masculine? Like, what are some improvements, say, in the liturgy, but not just in the Mass itself, like in, say, just the clubs that a church might have? So, like, should we do Bible studies, or should we do, like, men's groups? What should the church be trying to do to reach young people?
I don't think that I'm equipped to say what the church should or should not be doing. I don't think I have any expertise in that area. I think that what I can speak to is what men generally should be trying to do. So I'm not going to tell the church what to do. It's the church's job to tell me what to do, right? I'm not going to tell the church anything. But from my own experience of being a young man and growing up in a culture like that, there are some things that I have done that have helped me tremendously. And I think that one of the things that every single man who's going to be a father one day, every single man needs to know the faith. They need to intentionally spend time, not on Instagram, because there are people watching this who are going to spend an hour and a half on Instagram today, right? Not on YouTube Shorts, but you need to be spending time studying the faith of the fathers, because we live in a culture where heresy is just in the air. Just simply by being an American, you probably have some ideas that are antithetical to what the church teaches, and you don't even know it. So in order to inoculate yourself to that, in order to be immune from that, you need to spend a considerable amount of time knowing your faith, studying your faith. And once you do that, and once you've got your mind right, and you've got your intellect right, and you're thinking in a way that accords with the church, you're seeing the world through the lens of faith, then everything else will start to fall into place. And it's not going to be easy, right? None of this is a get rich quick or a take this magic pill, right? None of it is that. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a struggle. You're not going to like it at some points. But that's what we're called to as men. We are called to be wise so that we can lead our families. Because if you can't even lead yourself to heaven, if you don't know the faith well enough to save your own soul, how are you going to be the father of children? How are you going to teach the faith to your wife and children? You can't do it. So I think one thing that really taking the burden off and the blame off of the church and off the local churches, and just putting as much of the blame onto our own shoulders as young men and saying, it's my responsibility to learn the faith. It's my responsibility to teach my children the faith. It's my responsibility to lead the people under me to heaven. It's not the church's job. It's not the Catholic school system's job. It's my job. Put that weight back on your own shoulders and then do something about it. Because I hate the mentality, the victim mentality of being like, oh, the church let us down for the past 50 years. Maybe she has. Maybe she hasn't, right? Who cares, right? It's, at the end of the day, it's between you and Jesus. Did you do your job or not? Nobody's going to bail you out. Nobody's going to make excuses for you. Did you get the job done or not? And so that's kind of the way that I view it, is men need to take study seriously. Men need to reclaim the fact that we are the intellectual lights in our family. We determine the faith of our family. We determine the salvation of our children in a very real way. So that would be that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and that's the best, most masculine answer you could have gave to that question. So I like that answer a lot. But yeah, like you're a father already. You have 2 children and you're not in your 30s yet, which is very unusual for people today. So how did that happen? Like to actually dig into your own story now. Were all of these conclusions that you're making about personal responsibility and masculinity, were these from your own experience? How did you come across these tenets of masculinity?
I mean, how did I come across that? Well, a lot of it just comes from making mistakes and learning. A lot of it comes from observing people who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of me in life and seeing what I want my life to look like, and some ways, more importantly, what I don't want my life to look like, and seeing how the decisions that certain men made led them to where they are, and then just trying to copy what I've seen worked for other people, right? So I really think that it all comes down, though, leadership, right? That's what men are. We're leaders. That's what we're born to be, is leaders. We're born to take responsibility and to lead in the way that Christ led. How did Christ lead? Well, he says, the greatest amongst you shall be the servant of all. And so it really comes down to that. That's the principle of masculinity. That's the characteristic that makes men men, is how willing are you to humble yourself and to serve the people around you with your gifts. So I don't know if I have a specific place that I found it. Jocko Willink has it's actually an excellent book on leadership. He's a Navy SEAL. He has a YouTube channel and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's Christian or not, but he writes an excellent book on humility and leadership, and it's called Extreme Ownership. So if anybody's looking for how to lead as a servant, that was a wonderful resource for me.
Yeah, I've heard of him. I was actually kind of growing up in that self-improvement atmosphere before I started to dig into the Christian atmosphere. So yeah, I think that is appealing as well to a lot of young men, just because they are looking for meaning. And I think, well, one of the reasons a lot of young men struggle so much growing up is because they have these broken families. They don't have a father present at their home. So maybe a question that would be a good question, but maybe too personal for you to answer. What was your relationship like with your own father?
Yeah, my relationship with my dad was always really solid growing up. He's recently come back to the church. He was confirmed. He got his sacraments whenever he and my mom got married, so they get married in the church. But I don't think he would say he was a practicing or a devout Catholic until fairly recently, maybe 3 years ago. He went to confession for the first time since he and my mom had been married. And so that was a huge, huge step. But stepping away from my own dad and just speaking generally, maybe, I think that it's really impossible to lead your family well without Christ, without that example, without Jesus and without Saint Joseph. I don't see how people can lead their families well, because what does it mean to lead well? In order to lead well, you have to be going to the right place, right? You have to have the destination correct if you're going to lead well. And if you're not able to direct yourself to heaven, then it's impossible for you to direct others to heaven, right? You can't give what you don't have. It's the principle of sufficient reason. So that's generally, my dad was great though growing up. He was always very supportive of, sports. We did lots of sports and things like that. So yeah, my relationship with my dad still is very good to this day.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And yeah, thanks be to God that he's starting to come back to the church. That's amazing too. So yeah, we can go off in 2 different directions about how to bring some of our family members back to the church. You made an excellent video about that today, right? Really good video about that. But pause right there. We'll go on another way. So you also became a father recently.
Hmm.
How has that affected your own masculinity? Have you noticed any improvements in yourself?
Yeah, I think that you don't recognize how difficult being a parent is until you're actually a parent. It's I think that's probably the common experience of people that end up having children is they don't realize how difficult it is until they actually have one or two of their own. My wife says it best. She says after you have a kid is when you figure out who you married. Because whenever it's just you and your wife and you really only have yourselves to look after and you're both adults and you can both look after yourself. So there's really not that much sacrifice in a certain sense that needs to be made. But whenever you have a child and they are literally dependent upon you for everything, that's whenever you figure out how much metal your spouse has, how much power and clout and self-control they have, because you're going to be sleep deprived, you're going to be tired, you're going to have to change diapers when you don't want to, you're going to have to do all of those things, and it's an incredible amount of sacrifice. And yeah, I think that just having the occasion constantly to die to self and to pick up my cross in the small things, right? Like Therese of Lisieux talks about the little way and how you grow holy not through extraordinary actions, not through being a martyr, not through doing anything like that, but you grow holy through your day-to-day activities. And so being a parent, it certainly gives you just copious opportunities to be able to make those small sacrifices over and over and over and over again throughout the course of the day. And we got 2 kids now, so it's multiplied, and our oldest is 2, so it's constantly a game of it's 2 games of one-on-one with me and my wife most of the time, trying to keep track of the kids. But yeah, I would just say that it multiplies the number of opportunities that you actually have to make sacrifice for another human being.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. So, yeah, we can go back down that other path now. Like, we have a lot of young people. They might be coming back into the church, a lot of young men, but then they notice that, well, my parents aren't Catholic. They might have been raised Catholic, but they've since gone away from the church, or my brothers and sisters aren't Catholic yet, or even my friends, they're not Catholic. So how do we begin to talk about our Catholic faith? How do we share our Catholic faith with others, especially our family members?
Yeah, I think that the principles that need to be laid out in order for conversions to work is, first of all, you need to take Jesus's advice about removing the log from your own eye before you remove the splinter from your brother's eye. So the root of all conversion is prayer. And ultimately, the prayer of Christ is the cause of every conversion, right? The merits and the prayer of Christ while on earth. And so if you want somebody to convert, you have to merit or participate with Christ's merit in order to cause that to happen. And if you are living a life of sin, or if you're not actively pursuing holiness, or if you are complacent in your spiritual life, your prayers, even if you're in a state of grace, are not going to be very effective. They're not going to be very meritorious. One single sigh from the Blessed Virgin Mary is worth more than all of the prayers of all of the angels and saints combined. Why? Because of her excellence and holiness. So if you want to convert other people, it has to come from prayer. And if you want your prayer to be good, you have to be holy, and you have to be heading in the right direction. You have to be actively rooting out your vices, figuring out what they are, and chopping their heads off, right? That's how you become holy. So the first thing, really, if you want somebody else to convert yourself first, right? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that we have this idea that if I just prayed harder, right? And it's a fine line. You have to find the middle ground between these 2 points that I'm going to make. But the other point is, if you think sometimes if I just prayed harder, if I just fasted more, if I just did this, if I just beat myself up more, if I just, and you start to put all the blame on yourself and become too negative, where what God wants you to do ultimately is surrender everything to him totally. And so, like St. Monica, I talked about it in one of my videos, but St. Monica goes to St. Ambrose and she asks him for advice about converting Augustine, who one day would be Saint Augustine. And Ambrose says, "Leave him alone. The son of this many tears cannot possibly be lost." And Monica leaves consoled. Why was she consoled after Ambrose told her to leave Augustine alone? It's because Monica was trying to convert St. Augustine rather than God converting St. Augustine. And once Monica was able to surrender Augustine to God and basically say, he's your problem, you figure it out, right? It's not my job to save my son, it's Jesus's job to save my son. And once she made that jump, that's whenever Augustine's conversion really kicks into gear. Because what makes a prayer meritorious? Well, to a certain extent, what makes a prayer meritorious is how truly you can say, thy will be done. If you're praying and you're praying for money, or you're praying for a car, you're praying for a new job, right? And you're praying, Lord, please let my will be done. Lord, please let my will be done. That's not a very meritorious prayer. But if you surrender to Jesus and you surrender everything, the conditions, how it happens, what happens, when it happens, everything, and you surrender that totally to Jesus and you say, Lord Jesus Christ, you know my needs and you know my hearts and my desires better than I do, and I surrender this to you, thy will be done. That's whenever a prayer becomes incredibly meritorious. If you're praying and you're saying, Lord, please let my will be done, it's not a good prayer. It's not a good prayer, right? You have to have at the foundation of your prayer life the words, thy will be done. Not mine, thy will be done. And that's whenever you have something called holy indifference, which I also talk about in some of my videos.
Yeah, I catch myself saying the "my will be done" part a lot of the time, so that's a good reminder right there. And yeah, I like the talk about personal responsibility. That really, I think, is attractive to a lot of young men. They've been told all their lives, well, you don't have to be responsible, you don't have to believe in anything, you don't have to do anything. So let's go back to, say, just yourself at 18, maybe coming out of high school, and you're going out into the world for your first time, perhaps trying to become more of a man. What would be your advice right now to your 18-year-old self?
Read the Bible. I just
Great
never
answer.
really read the Bible. I didn't know what the Catholic Church was. I know that we went to Mass on Sunday, but I didn't really know why. I didn't know that there were 2,000 years of intellectual giants whose shoulders I was standing on. I didn't know that I was in the church that was founded by the apostles who raised the dead, the apostles who healed the sick and cured the blind, the apostles who founded the early church. I didn't know that I was a part of that, and I didn't even know where to start, right? So if I were to give advice to my 18-year-old self, I would just tell myself, read the Bible and figure out what it is that you're actually doing on Sundays. Because I had no idea. I think if I would have known, I would have responded positively. But my catechesis growing up was so shallow, right? It was just a bunch of, and once again, no disrespect anybody, this was just my experience. But I would go to religion class, and it was basically hang out and maybe read some out of the catechism a little bit and then discuss it just a little bit. But it never went deep. And sometimes we didn't even, I mean, it was just never deep. It was never deep. And it was always kind of taught as, yeah, this is what the church teaches, but we're just going to kind of hang out. Like there was no gravity in it. There was no sincerity in it. And so it didn't stick. So if I were to go back and talk to my 18-year-old self, I would say, listen, dummy, read a book, right? Go and actually figure out what the church teaches. Read the confessions, read the Bible, read the catechism. And once I had that information, that's whenever I was able to really dive into my faith and make something of it.
Yeah, I think reading just in general can turn you into, say, an intellectual powerhouse or something. Like you see all these books behind me. Haven't read maybe but 3 of them, but I'm trying to become, say, more intelligent because you're able to take other great men's experiences and make them your own. So
Yeah.
maybe right here we can jump off into a few fun questions to end out the show. I think we had a great serious conversation. Now a little time for fun. So how do I get a wife? I'm a 22-year-old man, doesn't have a wife. How do I find one? I think I'm your audience speaking to you.
Yeah. So a lot of that, I think we talked about a little bit with the principles of masculinity earlier, but a lot of it is just be humble, be aware that as a 22-year-old man, and as a 28-year-old man too, but as a 22-year-old man, you are very imperfect. You have a tremendous amount to learn, right? 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, really, myself included, I don't think anybody really has any idea what they're doing until they're at least 35. But be willing to accept the fact that you don't know everything. You're not good at everything, and that's okay. And recognize your defects and then look to improve them. Take responsibility for it. Put the burden on your own shoulders. Take responsibility, and then constantly be improving yourself and spend your time in the service of the Lord. And if you're doing that and you're constantly improving yourself and you're spending your time well, you're not squandering the gifts that God has given you, then a couple things are going to happen. One is, if you're using the grace God gives you, he's going to give you more. And if you're moving in the right direction, God's going to cause you to move even faster as you keep going. So you're going to become more and more virtuous. And what good Catholic women are looking for is a virtuous man who carries themselves well, which, by the way, the art of carrying yourself well, the art of being well-spoken, the art of dressing well and making sure that you're in physical shape and all these things, those are all virtues. The reason that people appear attractive whenever they're in shape and whenever they're well-dressed is because those are actually virtues. It's the virtue of modesty that regulates your exteriors. It's the virtue of temperance that regulates how much you eat. It's the virtue of fortitude that helps you to lift heavy things and be strong, right? So all of your physical appearance is just a reflection of what's on the inside. And obviously, you can lie with your appearance. You can wear a nice watch and rent a car and take a picture in front of a fancy hotel and make it look like you're super loaded, right? And then it's false. But generally, that's what women are looking for, is a virtuous man who carries themselves well. So start looking at how can you develop virtue and how can you accurately depict who you are through your comportment, through your speech, through all of these things. And then naturally, it just kind of falls into place. When you're ready, God will put the woman in your life that you need. And yeah, the St. Raphael novena is also something that's, if you want something super practical, you can just pray a St. Raphael novena, and then you'll know either God will send somebody into your life and be like, yes, it's time, or he won't. And you'll be like, no, it's not time. And then you can keep working on yourself. But I think the biggest threat is people have this idea sometimes that their life starts when they get married. No, your entire life up until the point where you're married is preparation. It's boot camp, right? It should be you getting ready to be a mother or a father, because it's hard and you're going to need all the virtue that you can possibly muster. So every single day is just an occasion to grow in grace, to grow in humility, to grow in fortitude, so that you're ready to take on a wife or a husband whenever the time comes.
Yeah, and I got off pretty easy by placing myself in that example right there. Not too big of a critique on me, but I think that'll be helpful to a lot of people. That's a great answer. So going to the next fun question, perhaps. Who is the saint that inspired your life the most, still inspires you?
So intellectually, my biggest formator would be St. Thomas Aquinas, certainly. I address every problem in my life through the eyes of Thomistic philosophy and theology. I've studied it fairly extensively now. I'm certainly far from an expert, far from a wise man, but I do know what a wise man says. I know what St. Thomas says about most things. And so I've been able to make all of the decisions of my life based on Thomistic principles. So intellectually, certainly St. Thomas. As far as spiritually, St. John, the evangelist, has been incredibly impactful. He's my confirmation saint. He is the contemplative of the apostles, right? And that's certainly been reflected in my own life. I have a theory, actually, about, so we all know that the law of osmosis of character or something is what it's called, but it's the idea that you become the average of the 5 people who you spend the most time with. I'm convinced that the more time that you spend with a saint or an angel in prayer, the more that their personality starts to rub off on you, right? So that's why praying the rosary daily is an incredibly powerful practice, because you spend 15 minutes a day with the holiest person ever to have lived, other than Jesus Christ himself. And so, intellectually, Thomas. Spiritually, I would say St. John. And then obviously the Blessed Virgin Mary has directed every single aspect of my life and gotten me where I am today. And then St. Joseph is the one who really, since becoming a husband and father, I've taken him on as a special patron. And let me say this. If you have prayer intentions, in my experience, St. Joseph is the most prompt to answer prayers. He is Johnny on the spot every single time. For example, I'll tell you a quick story. My wife and I were trying to figure out where we're going to live, and I'm in my spare bedroom in my house right now. We ended up buying a house. But we were going up to a St. Joseph shrine specifically to pray to St. Joseph to help us find our house. And that's what we were doing. So we drive up to the St. Joseph shrine. It's about an hour and a half. We make it into a pilgrimage. We listen to an audio Bible on the way. We pray on the way, try to keep it spiritual. We get up there, we do the pilgrimage, we go home, and I think we go to a Chipotle or something on the way home while we're driving. And while we're in the car, immediately after praying to St. Joseph, we get a phone call saying that the house that we wanted, this house, was ours if we wanted it. And because of some paperwork stuff, we were going to get it for $30,000 less than we thought, right? So St. Joseph is Johnny on the spot. He's never, ever let me down, and he's never, ever made me wait. If I turn to him with anything, he always immediately answers my prayer, and incredibly generously. So I have to say, St. Joseph is the man in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, St. Joseph, amazing. Mary as well. I think men can love Mary, very much so. Yeah, Mary is really the help of all Christians. And, well, I think we about hit the 30-minute mark here, but just one last hard question. I have to ask you one hard question. So, speaking of yourself, what is one virtue that you as a man still need to improve at? What's your biggest weakness? If you don't mind sharing your kryptonite.
Yeah, all of them. But specifically with having a 2-year-old daughter and having a 4-month-old son, patience, right? God will tell you what virtues you need to grow in, because the temptations that you have, the temptations that you have towards certain vices will indicate what virtue you need to grow in. And just being a father of a 2-year-old and a father of a 4-month-old, sometimes losing sleep, sometimes just having to be distracted, and I'm working on something, I'm doing something, I'm tasking, and then my daughter comes up and starts being a 2-year-old, right? I need to tend to her, or just watching kids all the time and things like that. The virtue of patience is definitely being grown in me right now, and I can tell because I'm often tempted to impatience, right? So that would be, I think, the virtue that right now I really, and if anybody's listening, please pray for me in that regard, because I really sincerely want to be a good and Christ-like husband and father. I want to be a servant leader, and patience is something that I am certainly short on a lot of the time, and I need lots of grace to overcome that vice in myself. So that would be what I would say is the principal thing that I'm working on right now, is just growing in patience and learning how to really suffer and endure those inconveniences well.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for being honest about it too. A lot of people wouldn't have an answer, but you said all of them, so that's the D, all of the above. Very good. And yeah, just if you would like to share any quick advice with men, young men like myself, how can they grow into men? How can they be successful?
Yeah, so the advice I would give for young men generally is pray 5 decades of the rosary every single day. If you're a young man, you're probably struggling with lust. That's just what most young men are struggling with. It's just the fact of the matter. If you want to overcome that and you want to be ready to be chaste, to be a husband, to be a father, to be ready to step into that leadership role and lay down your life for your wife and children, you need to start praying 5 decades of the rosary every single day. You could probably overcome lust other ways, but this is the easiest. This is the fastest. This is the most effective, and it's simply the best. So pray 5 decades of the rosary every day. Pray for your future spouse and ask Our Lady to guide you, and she will. She never lets you down. She's never let me down. So that would be what I would say. Pray 5 decades of the rosary every single day, and your life will change.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That'll be very helpful. And so if any other young men want some help, they want to hear some more of the message you're sharing about personal responsibility, where can they find you at?
Yeah, you can check out my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Cameron Riecker, and I can send you the link or whatever. And then also I have a Discord community, so you can join that, and we have a group of men there who are praying the rosary, oftentimes live together online, and we have a group of men who are praying the rosary individually, and it's an accountability group. It's a theology question group. You're able to pray with me often. I hop on there pretty often. So that would be another resource, is my Discord community. So the YouTube channel, the Discord community, that would be the 2 places to find me.
Yeah, and you do some personal coaching there as well, right?
I do. And if you're interested in that, you can message me on the Discord, or I usually put something out every once in a while to see if people are interested in working with me.
All right. Keep up the good work. I think this episode is going to appeal to a lot of young men. I think you're really tapping into a market of just people that have been away from the church, or they haven't heard of personal responsibility before. So that's going to attract a lot of young people back. So yeah, thanks again for joining the show. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting, and thanks for having me on. Appreciate you, Michael.
All right. And thanks everyone for watching. May God bless you.
Like the eternal city that is Rome.